Sir, welcome and thanks a lot for accepting our request to conduct this workshop for our interns.
Okay,
And we're really looking forward to it.
thanks. And I want to say hi to most of you who are here. I mostly know names because I only see on my screen a lot of names. And the topic that I have chosen to speak, for me, I have chosen it because it's, for me, slightly challenging to speak on because uh, um, a lot of people, there are a lot of online lectures, a lot of online talks, at least online courses available for students nowadays for research and how to go about research methodologies, so and so. I thought, let me speak on a topic that is closer to heart for me, because when I started doing my work, for one of the things that I was pretty unhappy with the way social sciences was working, the way the academia was. I found it slightly conservative, let me put it this way. And I did not find it empowering me to do or say something what I was. Of course, in the academia and academics, I learned a lot. I studied a lot. My teachers taught me a lot. But what concerned me, the issues that concerned me, I did not find academia very, very receptive initially. And so I was, from my earlier days, from my student days as a researcher, probably from my early MA days itself, I was looking for ways to overcome the limitations that any student who is interested in particularly social justice is interested in. So the actually topic that I have given is research for social justice. So I think that the question is, I do not know most of you who are in the group, but but as a young student, I was much more interested not just in knowledge, but how do I apply knowledge, what I'm doing as a student, as a researcher or an academic, how does that impact the society that I'm living in? That's one of the concerns. And I've seen not just me, a lot of fellow students, a lot of people come with this aspiration, and a lot of people find it, the academic environment, very hostile to these concerns, and they generally give up. Particularly PhD, they find it, particularly people who come from extremely disadvantaged backgrounds with particularly economic disadvantage, they find it very, very difficult to continue their studies, and also and particularly doing research appears to be a kind of a privilege, or only elites or only rich people can do it. A lot of people continue to do research mostly for getting scholarships and such benefits. So this is the broad way in which I would like to organize my talk. First, I'll talk about what is social justice. In that, I'll focus on what is not social justice and what are the different meanings of what social justice is. Then I would like to talk about research, and I'm assuming most of you are beginners or most of you are newcomers to the world of academia, particularly at a research level. So I would like to talk about the issues, the politics, the concerns, the challenges that any researcher will face, and plus the researcher who is interested in handling social justice or to deal with social justice. And then probably, if I have time and if the permit, I would like to look at what methodologies or what methods can be used to handle the issue of social justice. Okay. Okay. First, let me clarify myself. As a student of political science, and I've been teaching social justice for a lot of time, almost for more than 10 years. I've been teaching Rawls and other thinkers for a lot of time. And one of the things that bothers me is that in today's world that we live in, what is called justice? What is called justice? There is no proper consensus, because everyone claims in the name of justice. There are many claims today in the name of justice. There are marginalized groups asking for social justice. There are even the Hindu right-wing groups asking for right-wing groups also asking for social justice. There are sometimes privileged groups also asking for social justice. So within social justice, what is called justice itself has a very wide range of meanings, and a lot of people are not very clear about what justice is, and everyone has their own version of what justice is. So for most people that I've come across in my social life, in our life, and as well as students, for a lot of people, being a good human and being a good human and trying to talk about the poor, the disadvantage, the concern for the poor is what they think is social justice. So generally, it is generally seen as a kind of intellectual charity that one is giving towards the disadvantaged groups, whether it is women, Dalits, blacks, or poor, or whatever the group thinks is a disadvantaged group. And what is disadvantage itself is itself perceived by different groups differently. So generally, it is confused to my understanding with charity. There's a big difference between charity and justice. Charity is one of the big problem, particularly someone like David Miller, in his book Principles of Social Justice, differentiates between charity and social justice. And charity has very strong support and strong acceptance in our society, because religion, particularly religious values, this is what I call religious humanism. Religious values promote a kind of charitable work, like you should give you should donate the temples to the poor. In South, it's called Annadanam or Annadan. We should feed the poor, or you have to set up a langar, or you have to, or it is also considered very nice to give blankets to the poor, or to offer taking care of a girl child, and all these kind of charity. One of the big problems with charity is that it is generally seen with confused with justice. But the difference between justice and charity is that charity reinforces inequality, in the sense the person who is giving charity reinforces the person receiving the charity, the unequal relationship that exists in between the person who gives and the person who receives. So this is one of the big problems. So that is one option. Second, charity is not a moral obligation, in the sense it is good, it is nice of you, but it is not a moral obligation like you should tell the truth, like justice is. Justice is something that what we are owed to the others. Justice is something when someone is demanding what they are owed to. So so in that sense, charity reinforces the inequality. Plus, charity also can become self-serving, in the sense it makes you feel nice about about yourself. So it can be self-empowering or self-emancipating by dealing with someone who is weaker than you. So, but this comes at the psychological cost of reinforcing the unequal psychological relationship that exists between the giver and the taker. Altruism also is a kind of most people generally are speak in the language of altruism, where they don't want poverty to exist. Everyone should have good food. Everyone should have good clothes. Again, this kind of a things is again is very complex phenomena, where it's just again reinforces the it could be self-deceptive in telling oneself that one is a nice person. And so therefore elitism also can promote itself in the form of charity and altruism. And then I've used the word religious humanism is where with the help of religion, religious values, people involved in society to help society. That mostly is done for spiritual benefit. One of the classic examples of religious humanism I would call is Mother Teresa, for example. A lot of the time, Mother Teresa helps the poor, but that is done for her. Ultimately, she has to face God or Jesus Christ in heaven. So, so if that what that religion permits, that is what that particular person or a group is going to do. So this is one thing. And apart from that, in university terrain, in the university environment, we should also be very, very careful about people trying to show off themselves or try to attract others, because in so one is I call jingoism, by talking about the poor, disadvantaged. I also use the word left masculinity in a sense, by there is a lot of sexist politics, or what I call sexual politics, where by organizing a protest, or by organizing a dharna, or by organizing a march, by organizing politics. There are a lot of sexual politics, and also politics of show off, or politics of, it can be mixed with altruism, and politics of politics of attracting others, politics of trying to look attractive and interesting to the others. So in the campus politics particularly has that. This again is not particularly left, is left, and in certain places right-wing politics also might have this. Then there is victimhood politics. Again, victimhood politics again is not social justice, where most of the time every group is trying to articulate that it is the victim. And there's a contention about who is a victim and who is not a victim. So so a lot I've spent this time to show you that most people who come across or use the language of social justice generally are not really concerned about social justice, not just because they're hypocrites, but also because what they think is social justice, their conceptions are very, very different. So in my definition of what social justice is, I don't know how many of you are from the political science background. The definition that I've given on the screen is highly influenced by what John Rawls has been working on. I'm sure most of you who are from political science background know the classic called Theory of Justice by John Rawls. In his work, he works in a tradition of social justice. To explain that, let me make the distinction. Within moral philosophy, there are two layers. One is what is morality, and in what is morality, then what is morality? What is the sources of morality? This is what we deal with in meta-ethics. But what should be the principles? What should be the right action for individuals? What they should do? What they should not do? This is generally the concerns of moral philosophy. So when moral philosophy is applied at the level of individuals, what an individual can do, should do, and should not do, the limitations of individual action, and what are the principles through which an individual action should be guided, that is generally moral philosophy. But once you apply moral philosophy not at the level of individuals, but once we are evaluating the social practices, the rules and regulations, the design of the institutions that govern our society, all these things, when you are evaluating these rules, processes, and the designs, how the society is organized, both at the political level, at the institutional level, at the social level, at very aspects of this, when you are asking whether the rules, regulations, the design that run our society, that govern all of our behavior is moral or not, then you are beginning to act in the tradition of social justice. Of course, social justice has been explained by many people in many ways, but I find this one of the most attractive as a student of political science. So again, to repeat myself, the question that I would ask as a student of political science is, are the policies, the rules, the procedures, all that govern my life, that affect me, are they just, are they moral or not? And it's not about whether the person who is acting against me is right or wrong, but whether the rules, the rules, the principles that are embedded in our institutions, are they moral or not? That is the realm of social justice. And John Rawls has been playing a very, has played a very important role in this tradition of what I call social justice. Why this is important for us to understand? Again, this might look as mundane and obvious, but one of the most dominant traditions that exist in our society, I always call in its popular form, is Gandhianism. Gandhianism, again, in our society, the dominant one, again, is it pins morality mostly not at the level of social justice, but morality at the level of the individual. So therefore, for example, I gave an example that if a particular professor is harassing a particular student, the Gandhian perspective would blame the professor, the professor's moral qualities or the moral weaknesses or moral corruptness of the professor for his or her harassment of an student. But from the point of view of social justice, I would ask, what are the procedures, principles, or what are the systems that give power to this professor that he or she can harass a student? So instead of blaming the professor, I would blame the system, or I would blame the mechanism or the design that exists within a system that promotes that behavior in the professor and that behavior in the student. So a student of social justice or a scholar of social justice, and it is will focus on what it has been popularly called in what we call the circumstances of justice. A lot of effort in most of our mainstream understanding about social justice is on the individual morality, because generally the people say that in day-to-day parlance, it's not the system that is the problem, it is the people within the system that is the problem. Generally, social justice aims also to design the system, focus on the system that produces these individuals rather than only blame. I'm not saying that individuals should not be blamed, but equal emphasis should be given on what we call the situations of the conditions that produce injustice in that. So therefore, there is a lot of talk about what is called design justice, whether this design justice is extended from designing a department, a university, a political policy, or a social arrangement, to the way how our mobile phones are designed, to the way website is designed. In all these, wherever design is much more political than we assume it is. Because when injustice or inequality or advantage and disadvantage is inbuilt within the design, then it is very difficult to pinpoint or blame someone for any injustice that is happening within the system. In the old world, it was generally called structural injustice, or it has been called as structural violence. So again, social justice again is also not just to fight for that the rules, regulation, procedures, or the designs that our institutions are just, but also the conditions, the background conditions that exist behind these institutions. For example, if there is a university, maybe the university is designed fairly well, but the society that the university is existing, whether this design fits into that society, what we call, if the society is extremely poor, whether the design of the university or the shape, the policies of the university are taking into consideration the circumstances of justice, is also very important for social justice. And one more point I would like to add is social justice has now been extended to understanding what is disadvantage. And obviously, and also its opposite called advantage. It's in our social science language, it's called privilege, privilege and underprivilege. And a lot of the time, privilege is whatever is privilege is invisible to generally the privileged group. Only the underprivileged or less privileged can see the privilege of the elites. For example, male privilege is not visible to men. Only women can understand and observe what is the privilege that men have, or what is called male privilege. Elites in academia also have privileges that are not visible to them. Or they can't see it. So therefore, any policy that is favoring the disadvantage appears to be favoring the disadvantage. So apart from this, we should also the research on social justice also focuses a lot about disadvantage. A lot of research, racial research, caste research, gender research is about how do the structures, rules produce disadvantage. The term disadvantage, again, once for those people who have understood Rawls or have studied Rawls know that the famous maxim, the greatest benefit will go to the least advantaged. So what is advantage and what is disadvantage? I recommend the book by Jonathan Wolfe titled Disadvantage. Today in social justice theory and social theory of justice literature, disadvantage is not simply the opposite of advantage. Sometimes disadvantage produces further disadvantages. Just like advantage produces further advantages, disadvantage produces further disadvantages. Therefore, there has been a demand by Jonathan Wolfe and other scholars that disadvantage should not be seen just as a mirror opposite of advantage, but it has to be studied on its own term. Just like justice, injustice should be studied on its own terms rather than simply an opposite of justice. So broadly, to summarize my point, social justice is to work at many levels. One is to understand, one is to evaluate, understand, and criticize, and also to change the rules, regulations, processes that govern all of human beings or in a particular society, generally from a Rawlsian point of a closed society. This justice can also be applied to international relations. And that has been, this is the term, when it is applied internationally, it is called global justice debate. When it is applied at a national level or at a particular societal level, it is social justice in things. So one is to look at that, then also to look at the background conditions or the circumstances of justice, what we call the conditions that human beings live in, and how they produce both mostly disadvantage or inequality or injustice to society. There's a lot of research goes on into understanding that. And lastly, and how does domination work? And I'm using the term of Patricia Hill Collins about social justice is also a kind of fight against what she calls a matrix of domination. By matrix of domination, first, let me explain what is domination. Again, students of political science would know that if you come from Republican tradition, domination is when one human being tries to treat another human being like a slave. The term comes from the domination emerges from the Republican tradition, emerges from fighting against slavery. So freedom from domination is what Republican tradition talks about. So domination is when a group or individuals or one individual or a group of individuals or a class or a countries are treating another class as slaves, in which exploitation is one aspect, repression is another aspect, suppression is another aspect, There are many dimensions to this. So this domination does not happen only at one way. It can happen in many ways. Both class, caste, different aspects can work in order to dominate for individuals. And so therefore, that's why this matrix of domination is the term that I'm using. And all this to fight against all this is generally what I would like to call social justice. Just a minute. So I hope I have summarized to you what what I mean by social justice. Probably in the discussion, I might in our interactive session, we can expand or debate much more about what could be included or not about what social justice is. Now, again, I'm assuming that most of you are beginners or about to begin research or just beginning your research. One of the things that any newcomer to academia in general or academic environment in general finds out is that research is not a very neutral, very obvious thing. Research is not a very neutral or a friendly environment. For most students, particularly coming from disadvantaged backgrounds or alternate backgrounds or non-hegemonic backgrounds, they find that research is deeply linked to the question of power. So there's a power in the sense is because research, by and large, aims to produce knowledge about our society. And the knowledge that is produced about society is never neutral. Knowledge, if you know Foucault and a lot of other scholars who talked about that, knowledge is never neutral, objective, and beyond human concerns. Particularly, this is what postmodernism seriously brings. Postmodernism and Marxism brings into the production of knowledge or the politics of production of knowledge, because research is the basic means through which knowledge gets produced. And when this knowledge gets produced, the biases, the power equations, the power dynamics of the class, caste, all these inequalities are brought into in the production of knowledge. So generally, there is what is called a structural theories, and structural theories of research. In research, they generally see society as conflictual or society as contentious. In that sense, society is not a harmonious whole where everyone is living happily and everyone is happy with everyone's work. From a Marxist, feminist, and from this critical point of view, in society there is struggle between those who are powerful and powerless, from a Marxist language, between the haves and the have-nots, between the exploiters and the exploited, the elite and the non-elite. So there are a lot of matrices of dominations and power that exist in society. So in society there is a fight, a contention. This is what I call it. It's a contention, and that fight is generally brought into the university. And most of the universities, at least as of today, most of the departments, most of the faculty, most of the people, particularly in Western universities, is generally dominated by elite privileged class, because the criteria that is set to be appointed as a professor, that to be promoted as a professor. Now, all this thing is determined by the elites who have already occupied these academic spaces. And because they have the money, wealth, what I call capital, they can convert that capital into what we call cultural capital and social capital. And I'm sure anyone who knows the work of Pierre Bourdieu knows the concept of cultural capital and social capital. So because they are having money, the rich and the powerful have money, they can invest in that money for honing their skills, getting into good schools, good education, also going to travel abroad and enhance their skills once, and also develop their aesthetic sense in general. Once these aesthetic standards, academic standards, or knowledge standards are set, then they occupy the university environment, then they start reinforcing these standards into to others. And it's very, very difficult for people coming from non-privileged backgrounds or non-elite backgrounds to match up to these standards set by elites. That is one. So plus, as we know that society is based on ideas, society is based on the notions, the ideas that that society, the people in that society carry with themselves. So the ideas are based on knowledge that is produced about society. Control over knowledge is control over society. So if you have domination over knowledge or knowledge production, you also have domination about what is right and what is wrong, what is correct and what is wrong. For example, our legal academy, legal law, for example, who controls the law, who controls the court, what is considered just, what is considered unjust, what is considered fair, what is considered unfair. All this thing is determined through knowledge production. And one of the most popular guy is Foucault, and a lot of other people are what is called in academia called the sociology of knowledge. So since the academia is already filled with powerful elite privileged groups, it is very, very difficult to speak about social justice, because social justice fundamentally questions the very privilege that these elites or the dominant groups have within the academia. So there will be a lot of resistance for anyone who wants to work of social justice in the sincere way to articulate the problem and to work with that. So a lot of hurdles are constructed for students who want to either really speak or do research, genuine research about social justice, or to sincerely, or people from disadvantaged groups themselves trying to work on social justice. So one of the first things. So therefore, what is research? Knowledge itself is a very contested terrain. Most of you, again, must have you known something that there is contention about what is right and what is truth and what is not truth, what is right knowledge, what is not knowledge, generally at a broader level, at a very highly philosophical level. That realm where the what is truth, what is untruth, what is the correct ways to know the world, that realm is what is called epistemology. That field where people debate about what is the correct way to know the world, a debate between empiricism, idealism, and all these kind of debates that are happening. Again, these debates are also generally very elite in nature, because you need to have high levels of abstraction and high levels of time to spend on speculating about these things. Plus, again, knowledge production is also linked in most of our societies. Knowledge production, knowledge dissemination, and knowledge is also one of the basic means to also have access to resources, because most of the jobs that are distributed in our society, most of the job market is based on knowledge and meritocracy. So therefore, generally the powerful, the dominant, the privileged have occupied these spaces. And because of these privileged groups occupy these places, generally our academic environment will be patriarchal, in an American context, racial, casteist, communal. So it's an environment where it is all this, but since they know the counter arguments of their opponents who are questioning the privilege, the academicians are generally much smarter than simple people or outside. They are able to camouflage. They're able to hide their biases much more carefully, much more convincingly than people who are outside the environment. So any student who's entering research should be careful that whatever research proposal he or she is proposing, particularly in the realm of social justice, there will be a lot of resistance. Particularly, it is not rejected outrightly, but rejected in through very clever ways and means through which, without by sounding political correct, with by being politically correct, your projects couldn't be rejected. And one of the dominant values that are promoted within the academic environment globally is what I call ableism and meritocracy. Ableism is generally the term comes from disability studies, where some people are able people and some people are disabled people, and within the so-called able-bodied people, some groups are more able than others. For example, in a casteist environment, upper castes are more able, academically more able people than lower caste, to able to do good research or write good books than others. In a patriarchal environment, men are more objective, more neutral, more able to produce objective knowledge than women and other groups. So therefore, one branch of this ableism is what I call meritocracy. Meritocracy is where, as I told before, that the elites define what merit is, and by setting these criteria of what is a good student versus a bad student, what is the criteria that good student has versus a bad student, they can control what kind of research can happen, or what kind of research cannot happen. So this is one area where the politics takes place with this device of ableism and meritocracy. Apart from this, increasingly in the environment that we are in today, capitalism is deeply linked to research, because today education research has itself become a market. So a lot of people are willing to do work on social justice just to move up in the career, to move up, to get recognition, or to make money, or it's another market area. Particularly social justice today has become another market area where one can publish and benefit economically in that area. So therefore, apart from the racial privilege that does not allow research in social justice properly, even market forces have entered in. And because of this, lot of vested interests are involved in the research on social justice. That also produces a kind of research that again is problem to that doesn't produce genuine this. So in order to fight these problems, one has to think about strategies to deal with. And one of the most basic problems, or particularly when one is researching from the margins, there's a difference between researching from the margins and researching on the margins. Generally, the privileged again would like to speak of the poor. The privileged would like to speak of the, just like I'm sure you must have come across the term mansplaining. In mansplaining, men like to explain the conditions of women. This is called mansplaining. There is whites trying to explain the conditions of blacks, the upper caste Brahmins trying to explain the conditions and feelings of the Dalits, or the, so the privileged talk about the underprivileged. This is mostly self-serving in that sense. So they would do research on tribals and other people to maintain their caste class privileges. But people who are trying to do research on social justice now emphasize on research from the margins is the marginalized themselves start doing the research. And also the marginalized bring in their experiences, their feelings, their experiences, their insights, and their observation from society into research, which is generally resisted by the dom. So this is something what we need to understand within the realm called research, in the how we see research as politics. There's a very wonderful book, I have given it in the bibliography, Research as Resistance. So if you, so a lot of people, as I told in the beginning, a lot of people give up doing research because they find what they want to speak is not allowed to be spoken about or written in these things. And one big difficulty that Miranda Fricker, a very famous philosopher talking again from feminist standpoint epistemology. She introduces us to the concept of epistemic injustice. By epistemic injustice, I mean that whenever you want to articulate something, whenever you want to speak about some injustice that is happening to you, generally you do not have the audience, you do not have the community or the audience that understands what you are saying. She famously takes the example of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment in 60s, 50s, 70s was not considered as a serious problem. It was considered as a man's unethical behavior maximum or a minor this thing. Even in fact, in universities, we must have come across this famous movement called the Me Too movement. In Me Too movement, for example, most of the names that were given in the academia were this left progressive intellectuals. So just because this professor has written wonderful books and he had shown his Mabelism and meritocracy and he's published in Oxford and Cambridge, so his advances against women, and all these things were considered as minor demeanor rather than a serious infringement. So a lot of people were hurt when these names, a lot of people were complaining against the people who are complaining about this. So today sexual harassment is a much serious thing. So epistemic injustice means when you do not have the epistemic resources, not epistemic resources, the knowledge resources that you have to you need to speak about what you want to talk. So again, by linking with social justice, a lot of injustice, social injustice that happens in our society, it's very, very difficult to get the data, very, very difficult to get the information, very, very difficult to get the proofs or the evidence. Typically scientific methods, that is what is called positivism, is looking for evidence to accept your argument, to evidence to accept your proposal. Now, one of the big difficulties when doing social research, social justice research, is how do you collect the evidence? Where do you find the evidence? What you see is not what the opposite person sees. One. Apart from this, one is the lacking of the resources to see what you are able to see or what you want to show. Sometimes you yourself feel something, there is something wrong happening and you yourself are not able to see it or lack the resources to articulate it. This is one part. Then when it comes to politics, the refusal to see is also something that is very, very plays a very big role in when you're doing this. Mostly the dominant powerful groups that control the academia not just cannot see, but mostly deliberately they do not want to see what you want to show. And that environment is again circumstance, what we call epistemic injustice. And because of this, the language that we have inherited, a lot of research, a lot of study on language has shown that the language that the academia uses, the terminology that the language, the academic lingo that is used generally does not have the language that a student or a researcher on social justice would like to have. So he or she has to produce, has to be creative to make language speak in that sense. And therefore, I talk about collecting data. Collecting data is something very, very difficult when you have to do social justice, particularly when what is considered social justice, what is considered disadvantage, what is considered advantage is contested and a refusal to be accepted as something. Okay. So now I would like to go into what are the means available for a researcher who wants to work on social justice. Broadly, most of you might be knowing, but we know that their approaches are divided into positivist approaches and post-positive approaches. Post-positive, another name for post-positive approaches would be interpretive approach, or what is also called interpretive approach, postmodernist approaches. And in positivism is generally the most dominant and the most accepted form of approach that is used. Auguste Comte is very, very famous for this coinage of this. Positivism is generally the methodology approach of science. The basic assumptions of positivism is that we can have genuine, objective, neutral knowledge about the world in which we exist. And one of the big values of positivism is to remove our biases, remove our uninformed perspectives, remove them, and try to get a very objective, value neutral, and in other words, try to remove our biases against biases or our experiential biases that come in, our social biases or privileges to be not bought into into our research. And once you purge out all these biases, the so-called cleaned information that is available is considered valid knowledge. This is generally the positivist approach. René Descartes methodology. René Descartes is very famous for saying that I think, therefore I exist. One of the reasons that he went into this is to beat skepticism, is to overcome skepticism, where he wants to have knowledge that is completely reliable, that is completely objective. So the Enlightenment particularly aimed for knowledge that is objective. So biases were seen as something bad that should be culled out from this. That's what is positivism is, and this is one of the most dominant one. And from the social justice point of view, this has its problems, but it also has its advantages. We should remember that any social justice activist or a researcher who is an activist researcher who's trying to do social justice research is trying to communicate and convince his rivals or his opponents that there is discrimination, there is disadvantage, there is some social injustice. So therefore the researcher has to find some common ground to which on which he or she can appeal to his or her opponent. For example, whenever people are demanding affirmative action or reservation policies and they go to the courts, if you go to the courts always ask for data. Courts always ask for information and ask the applicants that give us the objective information that how much groups are actually belonging to OBC section, how many people are belonging to the lower the scheduled caste section, how much is the disadvantage, how do we know that this group is disadvantaged, how do we know that this group is not advantaged. These are all some things that generally the courts go into the question, and the group that is demanding generally affirmative action and reservations on constitutional lines has to provide information, has to provide data, has to provide this. For this research, some kind of an objective criteria is needed. So this is something that has been applied in race research, that though race is very, very subjective, but our subjectivity can be studied objectively. Racial prejudices, gender prejudices, caste prejudices can be studied objective. So generally it is also seen that post-positive approaches are more favorable towards social justice agenda research than positivism. But I think that a lot of good research has taken place using positivist approaches. I will mention this. I hope you're seeing the screen. Sukhdev Turat et al. Reservation and Private Sector Quest for Equal Opportunity and Growth. In this, what they've done is they've used a quantitative approach, which is part of, generally quantitative approaches are part of positivist approaches, then they're identified with that. In this approach, they sent application, they sent they applied to job applications in which they did a kind of experimental. This is what is called experimental research, in which they experimented by sending applications as an upper caste Hindu, a Dalit, and a Muslim, and then they used mathematical models and figured out that there is a discrimination. By using mathematics, you can, there's discrimination operating at the level of application itself. So therefore, if you're an upper caste Hindu, your chance of your application being accepted is much higher than if you are a Dalit and a Muslim. So in this is a classic example of, at least in a modern example, about how we can use a positivist quantitative approach and also an experimental approach to deal with discrimination, which is again the larger fight for circumstances of justice, and also ask for reservation in private sector. So this could be one example about how positivism can be used. But over the last 2 decades, positivism has come under heavy critique because this value neutrality and objectivity has been highly criticized by what we call critical theorists from the Frankfurt School. Postmodernist approaches have criticized it because one of the things that the critical theory argues is that this value neutrality is neither possible and neither desirable, because human beings are already, particularly in social sciences, we are already part of the society on which we are studying. So therefore, our biases, either overtly or covertly, and most of the time covertly, enter into our research. So therefore, instead of trying to aim for a goal of removing our biases, what they would suggest is to bracket our biases. That means, if I'm for example, if I'm a feminist, I would say that I'm a feminist, and my goal in most critical approaches is to fight for emancipation of women. I'm doing research for social justice and emancipation of women. So therefore, what I will do is I will declare that I'm doing this research for fighting for women's emancipation. Instead of trying to show data and information as objectively neutral, I already declare my bias so that the reader is aware of my biases. This is something that critical approaches generally follow. They declare their bias. They're not doing research just for the sake of doing research. They're generally trying to do research to change the society. So therefore, theory research is linked to practice of in transforming the society we are living in and transforming the society for better ones. So therefore, positivism is generally seen on the objective side. So post-positive approaches take subjectivity of the individual doing the research. They give space for the subjectivity of the researcher within the research project, and that is considered much more fairer, because the reader can differentiate the subject. If the subject particularly belongs to the same community or group, that disadvantaged group that he or she belongs to, then the subjective becomes a vantage point in understanding that particular group's injustice or discrimination or the problems that particular community faces. Apart from this, the interpretive approaches that are used by hermeneutical approach and deconstructive approaches, and even what we also call phenomenological approaches to, in certain ways, are also trying to deal with biases. But the way they deal with biases is to what Husserl calls epoche. That means to bracket our perspectives. For example, what are when a man is doing research on women, what are the assumptions that a man has? So all these kinds of things can be temporarily bracketed so that they can be factored in when doing these reports. So therefore, I would say that a researcher doing on social justice can apply both positivist approaches and post-positive approaches, or what nowadays has been called mixed approaches. It depends on the creativity and the problem that the researcher is trying to handle, to tease out the issue at hand. For example, whether Mayawati's rule in UP did play positive role in development of Dalits or not. So one researcher has looked at the satellite images before Mayawati was in power and after Mayawati was in power, and looked at the electricity. They took night pictures of that area with satellite images and see how much electricity has reached Dalit areas and this area. So therefore, this kind of scientific approaches or creative approaches can also be used for fighting social justice. And today in the new era, we are using data science, particularly data science. I was telling for affirmative action in United States and other places, particularly governmental agencies, when they want to frame a policy, when they want to do something for the disadvantaged, they lack the right perspective, right approach, right techniques to do that. So a lot of research, social activist research, you collect the data. Based on the data, they know to exactly what kind of policy and what kind of a resource, what kind of a intervention is needed can be used. So in that sense, positivism can be used very well for social justice. But post-positive approaches can be used in realms where it's very, very difficult to find data, very difficult to articulate. There, these interpretive approaches through interviews, the subjective experiences of the people who are going through oppression and all these things can be brought about by critically evaluating the dominant perspectives, hegemonic perspectives, counter-hegemonic perspectives, and also bringing the subjective experiences much more and interpreting them in such a way that this is what generally is, and therefore ethnography is one of the methodology that is used in social justice research, particularly on the marginalized communities. I have a friend from Hyderabad Central, not from Maulana Azad University, is working about the sanitary workers among Muslims in Hyderabad. So he's a sociologist approaching, he's using ethnography as a means to study the discrimination and the challenges that the sanitation workers among Muslim communities facing within the city of Hyderabad. So ethnography. Apart from this, there is research, particularly what work happening on Dalit autobiography. This realm is nowadays called. This is an approach that is again new innovative methods are getting used. It is called autoethnography. Autoethnography is where people write their life stories, they're bringing their emotions, they tell it in the form of stories, they tell it in the form of different forms, the songs, poetry, the way they dress up, the way they use symbolism, the way they do. So a lot of these other areas also, these other means also are used today to understand and do research on social justice, particularly on extremely marginalized groups where they don't have the resources, neither the language, neither the tools to articulate in the language that the mainstream society understands. So particularly Dalit autobiography is one area where this autoethnography has been used. One famous book that has come from Jamia is by the book called Nothing Will Be Forgotten by Nihal Ahmed. He's written a book called Nothing Will Be Forgotten about the struggle of women in Shaheen Bagh, how they protested. And so therefore he uses his personal experiences, his own opinions, his own emotions, as well as what he has observed as a form of doing what we call autoethnography. And so this, in that sense, about the particular policy that the government bought for changing the Citizen Amendment Act. So this could be one example about where an autoethnography where the individual writes about himself and the environment around. So this could be one way where post-positive approaches could be used in doing social justice research. So one has to be critical. Critical means the questions that have been asked, what are the assumptions behind those questions? Most of the research, critical theory approaches asks us to question the very questions that we ask. this has been one of the most useful tools that have been used in social justice research, which is in the academia, where what are the assumptions that society has, what are the assumptions that the researcher has. This is something that has been used. And indigenous research, particularly when people are doing research on indigenous groups or what has been called Adivasi groups or something, the methodology that these groups have, the idea of knowledge that these groups have, the idea of, so these knowledge also should be accepted as knowledge systems, not the dominant knowledge systems that the dominant society have. So indigenous methodologies is to give space to different ways in which society looks at knowledge production, and indigenous groups or Adivasi groups are extremely marginal, who have their own ways of relating to the world, or the way they produce knowledge about their oppression. And this is where what has been called decolonizing methodologies have been talked about by this famous book by if you see this slide, Tuvi Smith, L. Smith, Decolonizing Methodology, Research and Indigenous Peoples. He talks about how university environments are dominated by Western dominant methodologies. We need to decolonize our methodologies and allow other forms of different ways in which knowledge production could be accepted, because mostly universities determine what is knowledge and what is not knowledge. So in that sense, there's a fight happening between knowledge, who defines what knowledge is, and particularly Western theories about knowledge is now challenged through this thing. Another option that has been available is what we call participatory action research. Again, in this case, the researcher goes and participates and tries to become part of the group or the community to which is generally, most of the time, it is the researcher himself or herself belongs to that research community. But participatory active research also can be done by people who are not necessarily belonging to that community, but they are willing to go into the group and willing to accept the perspectives, criterias in order to understand the problems or the challenges or the injustice that particular group is facing. One of my students is working on Dalit, what is called being politics of memory, what is called mnemonic injustice or mnemonic justice, in that how the politics of memory of how the past is preserved by the elites, how the past is projected by the elites, and how the past is denied to the non-elites. So generally, his kind of work is about participatory action research, where he goes into the groups, talks to people, and tries to get so this is, again, we can use so critical research methodology. To summarize my argument about methodologies is that one can mix and match various methodologies. From my point of view, no methodology is inherently opposed to social justice, but using it with the help of critical theory and other what is called emancipatory approaches, one can mix and match various approaches to do research on social justice. I'm ending some of the books that I would like to comment on. I've already commented on Sukhdev Thorat's book on reservation private sector and how they did this research about finding about this. But one of the most very popular book about linking things like engineering and social justice by Donna Reilly. It's a very famous work where she does she talks about how the field of engineering can be used for social justice, and so therefore she talks about how engineering research can be used for social justice rather than maintaining the privileged material advantage of the rich people and so. And so I've already spoken about decolonizing methodologies, about how our methodologies are based mostly Western dominant and also accepted by like local elite. And these both Western elite and local elite together impose a particular regime of what can be said and what cannot be said. What is, in fact, if you understand Foucault's concept of discursive apparatus or discursive knowledge. What is deemed knowledge and what is deemed not knowledge is determined by what is called what has been called discipline. The term discipline itself is to restrict what has been this. And also I recommend this book, Researcher Resistance. They have talked about various strategies that can be used at length in the book. And also to tell you about how to use positivist approaches and other data, this book by Virginia Ebanks about automating inequality and Safiya Noble's algorithms of oppression. These are all ways in which people are particularly looking at the way how designing of a system can itself produce injustice. And so with that, I would end my talk, and thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you so much, sir, for this comprehensive lecture. And I think interns have gained a lot of insight and knowledge through your lecture.
It's a pleasure talking to you guys.
Thank you so much, sir.
And thanks a lot, CSPS India, for giving me this opportunity and also to express my views on this topic. Thanks once again.
Thank you, sir. Take care. Thank you so much.